So this is session C1, Innovations in Volunteer Engagement. Hopefully you are in the right place, and if you're not, you're taking up a seat of someone who booked this was overbooked. My name's Megan Paull and I'm your facilitator for this session. We're going to start first of all by an acknowledgement of country.
Hi everybody, my name is Tracey O'Neill. Yumalundi, welcome to Ngunnawal land. I would like to invite you all to place both your feet on the ground, including you at home or at work who are joining us virtually. If you'd like to, you can close your eyes, and I would like you to become aware of the connection that you're making with the ground you're on today. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the lands of the Ngunnawal people who have lived, worked, played and cared for this land for tens of thousands of years. As you inhale, I invite you to bring your attention to your body and your connection with the sacred ground on which we meet. As you exhale, you may offer gratitude for the privilege to be sitting on country today. We acknowledge the incredible innovations of all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across this land, many hundreds of countries who have contributed to their rich culture and the amazing continuity of the oldest living culture on this planet. We extend acknowledgement to all Ngunnawal elders, past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today and at home, and we hope you have a fabulous conference.
Thank you, Tracey. I think that's a fabulous way to start, don't you? So I have a little bit of housekeeping, and of course this gets better. A little bit of housekeeping. It's 5:30 in the morning, or 6 o'clock in the morning for me, so just bear with me if I don't quite get it all right. The toilets are situated on the ground floor, level 2, outside door 6. And there's a disabled toilet on level 4, which can be accessed via the lift if anybody needs them. The evacuation point in case of an emergency is on the footpath outside across the road from Llewellyn Hall. There are fire exit doors in between the Larry Sitsky room and the main concert hall, so that's just out there. I think that's enough for the housekeeping, but with all of you all on top of each other in here, I would ask you to actually leave the room in an orderly fashion. I hope that we don't actually have to. Okay, so once again, this is me. You don't need to know anything about me. What you do need to know is that you can ask questions via Slido. We have a moderator of questions who is due to arrive any minute. So we're going to hope that that gets sorted, and if necessary, I'll have to try and work out a way to manage the technology, but we'll be fine. So Slido is a way that you can ask questions and then we can use those as part of the discussion. This means that the people who are watching online can also ask questions. So, our panel today. DJ Cronin, Volunteer Experience Manager at Uniting Care. Tracey O'Neill, Senior Manager Volunteer Engagement at the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. Leesa Riley, Statewide Volunteering Manager, Parks Victoria. And Kylie Elliott, Volunteer and Supporter Engagement Lead, Sydney Children's Hospital Foundation. Now let me tell you, I've done nothing in this. These guys have organised it all, and I'm sure you're in for an absolutely fabulous session. We're going to have 5 minutes from each speaker, and we have someone at the front helping us with timing. So I'm going to ask DJ to take the podium.
Good morning, everybody. I'm in a bit of trouble. I thought it was 50 minutes. It's going to be interesting. No, I'm not kidding. My name is DJ Cronin. I'm from Queensland. As you can tell, I was born in Brisbane. So 5 minutes is quite a lot of time to talk about innovation, but you'll notice I have some topics up there. So if you've got any questions around those, I do encourage you. Today's all about questions, asking about innovation. Look, the day that I think that I know everything about volunteer engagement is the day that I need to leave the sector, because we're always learning. I've been working in volunteerism as a volunteer manager, business partner, etc., all the titles that we all have for a quarter of a century now, which makes me feel very old. So that's why I sent in a photograph of many years ago. And this has happened lately. I heard it's a distinguished look to have a grey beard. My kids tell me I look like George Clooney, aged 90. So I'm going to start with some quotes on innovation that may surprise you if you haven't heard them before. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity and change. There is no innovation and creativity without failure. When failure is not an option, we can forget about creativity, learning and innovation. Vulnerability is the absolute heartbeat of innovation and creativity. There can be zero innovation without vulnerability. We would solve a lot of huge problems that are causing massive suffering in this world, like poverty, violence, war, homophobia, racism, the environment, all these things that are crippling us. We need big, bold, dangerous and crazy ideas to solve these problems. When failure is not an option, innovation and creativity are not options. I'd like you to ponder that. These are quotes from a person by the name of Brené Brown. A couple of years ago, I was fortunate enough to win a scholarship and I became a Dare to Lead certified trainee. To innovate, I believe that we need to learn to lean into our vulnerability and show up in the arena of innovation anyway. Vulnerability was Brown's recommendation for a company with a huge creativity and innovation problem that wanted to hire her to speak. No vulnerability, no creativity, no tolerance for failure, no innovation. It is that simple. If you're not willing to fail, you can't innovate. If you're not willing to build a vulnerable culture, you can't create. What is at the heart of daring to lead? You can't get the courage without rumbling with vulnerability. Embrace it. Self-awareness and self-love matter. Who we are is how we lead. Courageous is contagious. To scale daring leadership and build courage in teams and organizations, we have to cultivate a culture in which brave work, tough conversations, and whole hearts are the expectation, and armor is not necessary or rewarded. When I was employed at Uniting Care as the Volunteer Experience Manager in 2019, little did I know that life-changing events for the world and for me personally lay ahead. COVID began, and here I was leading a small team in a huge not-for-profit in Queensland that had volunteers in our Lifeline crisis line, our 4 hospitals, our aged care facilities, our Lifeline retail stores, and family and disability services. Lockdown affected most volunteers, and yet our volunteers on our crisis lines were taking the most calls ever in our history. But rather than cower down, we leaned into the vulnerability of the situation and innovated at a scale never before seen at our organization in many ways. We created our first executive and board endorsed volunteering framework. We developed the first enterprise strategy for volunteering at our organization. We developed individual strategies for every service stream in our organization. We developed an internal volunteering portal for all staff. We created a concept called Volunteer My Way. Am I finished? We grew our volunteer experience team at the organization from 5 full-time equivalents to 10, hiring subject matter expertise. And today I believe we have the best volunteer experience team in the nation, and I'm saying that for my team who are watching online. We initiated new volunteer recognition awards and embedded them in our Full Circle and Reconciliation awards. There are so many more I could go through, but I don't have the time, and I hope that you will ask some questions. But the other thing that happened for me, I discovered mindfulness and I discovered mindful leadership. And the reason why I discovered that, because I had some events come into my life that shook me to the core. My best friend of 27 years suddenly dropped dead. A few months later, I was in hospital myself, undergoing 2 surgeries. One was a life-saving surgery, and it certainly shifted my thinking to become a mindful leader, a courageous leader, and an innovative leader. I encourage you all to be courageous, to live in the moment, to be successful, and lean into your vulnerability. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I could make lots of comments, but I'd like to invite the next speaker up, Tracey O'Neill.
Gosh, I could make lots of comments too. We should have ended with that, right? Thank you, DJ. Really, gosh, excited and honoured to be on a panel with these incredible leaders of volunteer engagement, but also to sit in a room and to be online with so many hundreds more. What I have to say, I'm going to share a little bit about what we've done at the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, where I work, and I guess a lot of it ties into what you spoke about, DJ, because I think for me, one of the most important things about being able to be innovative is the culture that we help to cultivate in our organisations, and therein lies the power in your hands. So the Brotherhood of St Lawrence is an organisation who aim to create systemic change to tackle poverty in Australia. Our vision is for an Australia free of poverty. And working in this organisation has given me many opportunities to really challenge the status quo of volunteering in this country. And I invite you all to do the same. One of the things that I tell people now is that many of us work from a very traditional model of volunteering, where volunteering is transactional, where we as an organisation decide what the problems are, what the gaps are, and what volunteers need to do, when and how to solve those problems. And I think if we flip this, we are actually creating a culture in which volunteers get to lead in this space and help to initiate innovation. So I didn't write notes, so I've got to refer to mine. The first is around taking control of the narrative. You will get these slides, so we've given permission for these slides to be shared, so feel free to, you don't have to write them down. To take control of the narrative. You have the opportunity to share with your organisation what volunteers and what volunteer engagement means. For us at the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, we noticed very early on, so our team is relatively young. I've been there 2 years and our whole team have been together for 12 months now, just over. Many people who we felt would benefit from volunteering, mainly our participants at our organisation, were excluded from doing so because of the way we set up our program. And the narrative that we've created is around the fact that people with lived experience should be the ones who are helping us to both identify the challenges and the problems and help to actually come up with the solutions. One of the things that we noticed, and this came from surveys, it came from conversations, and it came from feedback from our leaders across the organisation, was that most volunteers in our organisation come from a very privileged position. They're educated, they're white, they have access to technology, they have flexible and permanent employment, they have access to transport, and most of our participants don't have all of these things. And our volunteering roles required us to have them. You need to travel here to volunteer. You need to come in every Tuesday. We will only correspond with you by email. And what we realised that through supporting this old narrative of volunteering, we were perpetuating harm to these people that we were trying to eradicate in our organisation. So I encourage you to think about the mission of your organisation, and I encourage you to think about volunteer engagement more broadly. What are our possibilities? How do we make sure that everybody is able to participate in volunteering at our organisation? And position, excuse my spelling mistake, but position volunteering as a solution. So one of the things that we identified during COVID was that many people who were struggling to reach their goals in their work with us as an organisation did so because they had very limited digital literacy skills. So one of the things we did was establish a digital literacy program that's run by volunteers. So volunteers supported those the participants to develop the skills they needed to go out and seek employment. We also had our English support program. So again, many of our participants have English as a second language. We work with a lot of migrants, refugees and asylum seekers. So we've developed a lot of buddying programs and conversation programs and mentoring programs to support English literacy improvement. And we are also now looking at buddying programs for people who historically have not been able to participate, people with disabilities, people who have social anxiety, and making sure that we're giving them whatever support that they need, whether that's individual interviews, whether that is someone to work alongside them, whether that is taking them step by step through a process. So remember that you have the opportunity, the power, and the expertise to lead that culture change and to create the narrative in your organisation for just how powerful volunteer engagement can be.
When we were preparing for this, I was told to kick them off exactly on 5 minutes. That's proving to be a little hard because there's so much important stuff to hear. I would just like to invite Leesa up to be next. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Try to keep to time. Thank you, DJ and Tracey. It's truly a privilege to be on this panel today and be with you here. So I'm Leesa Riley and I'm currently the statewide volunteering manager at Parks Victoria. Before that, I was with Conservation Volunteers Australia. So I've been in the environmental volunteering sector for 19 years now. Parks Victoria is a state government agency that protects about 4 million hectares of land and marine environments. And we partner with about 380 volunteer involving organisations and around 20,000 volunteers. So some of you might think, yay, that's a big number. You got lots of volunteers, but it also can be quite overwhelming. But environmental volunteering is actually quite small. It only makes up 9% of the total volunteering across Australia. So that's quite small compared to the health, the education and sports sectors, for example. We do know, though, that environmental volunteering and the environment in itself is actually an area of concern. And when the Volunteering in Australia research came out late last year, Volunteering Australia released that, animal welfare and conservation organisations were actually at the top of the list of organisations that people wanted to volunteer for. But we're not seeing that growth in the sector, and we're not seeing people actually, convert into environmental volunteers. So in 2018, we were fortunate to receive funding to grow and support volunteering, specifically in environmental volunteering. And when we thought about how we would spend this money, we actually thought, why not give it back to the communities directly, so that they could spend it on what they think that they wanted to do to actually grow and support their organisations to get more volunteers. So we set up the Volunteering Innovation Fund and we distributed $2 million to community groups and young individuals to test their ideas. We initiated this approach in 2018, but interestingly, it aligns with what we heard when we were developing the national strategy as well. And it's that systemic shift, so it's launching today, that systemic shift that organisations have said that they want to see to enable a community-led approach where the community organisations have the ability to direct the way that funding is spent. So I'll just go over 2 examples so I stay to time, Megan, that groups have tried. And similar to Tracey and DJ, I emphasise try. We set up the funds so that people were able to fail. We encouraged people to try their ideas. If they failed, that we know that we learn from that, we can adapt, we can change, or we can try again. So the first example demonstrates a way in which technology can actually diversify your audience and create inclusion. During COVID, BirdLife Australia put out remote technology ecoacoustic monitoring stations. So that's a lot of words, but what it was listening posts in wetlands that you can't get to listen to the sounds of birds. And they trained volunteers to actually be able to sit at home, sit at work, whenever they wanted to actually listen to these sounds. So anybody could be included in this program. They saw a great increase in their number of volunteers, and we also recorded rare bird species that we'd never recorded before. Just quickly, the second example is a project that demonstrates while we might think we know what motivates a person to volunteer, we actually can't make assumptions based on their interests. So one of the groups developed a marine citizen science program for volunteers to monitor sea life while snorkeling, and they pitched it to recreational fisher people, but none of them signed up. So they thought their interests were the same, but they actually didn't align. So it teaches you that we do need to know what motivates volunteers. So we've funded over 90 groups and young people through this initiative, and I've put the QR code up there because there's lots of stories that you can learn from these community groups.
And our final panellist is Kylie Elliott.
Thank you so much. Look, I feel so privileged. I know we all say it, but I do. Like, these are like my superheroes. I've learned so much from these three, especially this year when we've been working with the strategy. I think you see that there's kind of a theme here that we're put up here as leaders, and we're all a bit, but it's all about listening to our volunteers. So everything that we've done, everything I've done, like I work for the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation. I started there 3.5 years ago. And 3.5 years ago, I was a volunteer coordinator and I applied for this job. And I walked in and they said, okay, volunteers, there's 2 hospitals, there's Randwick and Westmead, and we do lots of fundraising. And everyone just looks after their own volunteers, and we've got Excel sheets. You can have the Excel sheets and just put it on our database and off you go. So I put, I think it was about 600 names onto the database, and of those 600 names, 200 had surnames. Most of them didn't have emails. So I got down to about 200 people, emailed them, and I haven't volunteered for years. So what it was their parents and their friends, and they got everyone in, and it was like, now Kylie, can you make this like professional? And I was like, off we go. So 3.5 years later, we're the first organisation in New South Wales to implement the standards. So I suggest you guys just use your standards. I used it as a roadmap because I had no one helping me. Everyone was like, oh, thank God you're here. I was like the most popular person because all of a sudden all the drama was going to be with me. And that's what they saw volunteers as. The volunteers could walk in. We have gala balls. We have like 10 gala balls a year. Like our gold gala last year broke an Australian record and we raised $9 million in one night. When I started, they only employed paid models. And I was like, how do the models work? Oh, hopeless. They look so pretty, but they turn up late. They never read briefs. They just don't understand what an iPad is. Like they're pretty much holding it upside down. Can I have volunteers at it? And it was pushing for about a year, letting them trust me. And like Tracey said, changing the narrative is so important because sometimes we walk into our organisations and it's like, you get the volunteers in and just get them to do this job. They don't realise we're going to be HR. Like, you know, HR get to, you know, do these lovely interviews and check these people out and they get all these training and all this, but us, we have to just get people in, know exactly what they like, make sure that they do it right and then walk off. So it's really, really important that you get to know your staff and then you're the advocate for the volunteers. So 3.5 years later, I had students, I had teenagers doing gold last year, broke Australian records with only teenagers. Unbelievable. Even on the night, I still had a couple of staff members that were a bit funny about teenagers. We had the Packers. The year before, we had the Hemsworths at a table that volunteers were looking after. But what I did was something innovative. I just woke up one morning, as we all do in the middle of the night, I've got an idea. And I rang up a local Sydney school called Winona. So it's one of the most elite private schools in Sydney. The parents will pay, you know, $40,000 and they have 3 daughters in there. So these are the kids that are actually, of the parents that are attending. So on the night I said to the staff, you know, they're 17, 18 years old. Some of them are a bit nervous about going up and interrupting conversations. Can the staff just go in and like be like a wingman, like, have you met these, you know, this is Sarah and this is Jane and she's volunteering today. Staff came back and said, Kylie, do you know how embarrassing it is when you walk up and Ian Thorpe jumps up, gives her a hug and says, where's mum and dad? And she goes, next table over. You know, I walked to another table and I introduced this volunteer and everyone laughed at me because of mum and dad. I was introducing her to a mum and dad. You know, so now this year we're going to go one step further. We've got another school, so we're going to have boys and girls at it. But this year we're going to go out and we're going to train the students in philanthropy. So all of a sudden, your teams that were like, oh, off you go, little volunteer coordinator, you know, a couple of years' time, I've now got a volunteer coordinator who's amazing, Kylie, working with me today, and it was just me 3 years ago. I said to Kylie, in about 10 years, you're going to have the major donors coming up, major donor team coming up to you saying, can you introduce me to this person? Because I believe they volunteered with you. Or I'm going to have someone from our corporate team saying, we need to go and speak to this doctor. And I saw that they volunteered with you. So trying to be innovative doesn't have to cost anything. You don't have to be super smart. What I say to Kylie, you've got to be scrappy. You've got to be scrappy. You've got to take those, you know, you're just a volunteers, they're just volunteers. You've got to take it, but you fight with that. And then you come back at them and then you do something like make them look like total knobs when they have to go up to someone and say, this is a volunteer and, you know, it's their parents. So it's all about that's all we've done. Nothing has cost me money. I had no real budget. I do have a budget with our organisation really believes in volunteers, but they didn't know anything about it, nor did I. So I reached out on Facebook. I think it was during COVID that Tracey emailed me on LinkedIn, and now we're best buddies. But I've learned, and through joining Tracey on LinkedIn, I saw who she joined. Anyone that had the word volunteer in their title, I've probably joined all of you in here. But then you'd see someone so COVID, I was traveling the world in COVID. I was doing courses, all over the world. So that's all it's all about. Come and speak to me afterwards. I'd love to talk to anyone about it, but you all can do it. I don't care how small your organisation is. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm sure you'll all agree that this is a great start to a discussion. I was asked to talk a little bit about what is innovation, and we played with a few models and came up with a few ideas and decided that actually innovation is whatever you need it to be. And it can be the thing that slowly but surely is little things that are incremental, and you only realise it was innovation when you look back and see how much things have changed. So please ask your questions on Slido. We have actually got quite a few questions coming through already because this was up before.
Sorry, Megan, can I just really quickly, for those of you who haven't used Slido, you literally, and this is for you at home and at work, sli.do, that's all you need to put into your web browser and write how engaging in the little box, and it should come up with the option for you to send questions. So just wanted to make sure everyone knew how to use it.
I'm sure the person next to you can help you if you can't do it yourself. Okay, so we do have a moderator. All right, do you want to come down and sit down here? The questions that have been coming through are fantastic, but one of the things I wanted to say is that very early on, one of the things that came through was best acknowledgement of country I've ever heard. Very moving, well done. And one of the early questions that came through was about awards. So what I might do is just ask each of the panellists to comment on awards. The sorts of things that are being asked is, what do they look like? Are they real tangible things? That sort of thing. But what are the awards that you're doing or not doing in your organisation? That just gives people a little bit of time to get onto their Slido and get things moving.
Awards as in recognition for volunteers? Yeah, so at our organisation, when I joined as volunteer experience manager, They had staff awards. Full Circle, it was called, Full Circle and Reconciliation Awards. Held a really big event held in Brisbane City Hall. But I noticed that volunteers weren't part of that. So I worked hard to ensure that volunteers were part of that, and we have 3 awards for volunteers. All the nominees are invited to the event. Those who have been nominated, and it's a spectacular gala, and we're lucky enough to have the funds to be able to do that and recognise our volunteers in that way. But we're forever putting volunteers through to other external awards, Australian of the Year, the Queensland Volunteer Awards run by Volunteering Queensland. What I would say is any opportunity that you get to promote your volunteers publicly reward. Of course, the best reward for a volunteer is meaningful volunteer work, and that they can see the impact of the work that they're doing. Sometimes we forget that that is an actual tool for recognition and reward, that they know that the work that they are doing is making a difference.
Thank you.
Ditto, ditto, ditto. I think that impact one is a really important one. I won't talk about what we've done because it's really similar to DJ, but one of the things that we have done at the Brotherhood of St Lawrence is we started a volunteer experience reference group. So we have a group of volunteers who come together and discuss all things volunteer engagement and give us advice and guidance. And recognition was one of those things that we took to this group. And what was very interesting was their feedback about what they wanted. And it wasn't awards. They're not really interested in awards. We will still do awards, but that's not what they're interested in. The feedback that we got from volunteers was that they wanted thanks and acknowledgement from their direct managers and the participants and customers and people with whom they work. They shared with us that they wanted a deeper connection with our organisation. So they wanted to learn more, they wanted to know more about what we were doing, they wanted to know the outcome, not just of their work, but of the work right across the organisation. They wanted to know what difference we were making in alleviating poverty. And then they talked about some really personal, tangible opportunities for recognition that they would be interested in, things such as writing a letter to their boss or one of their family members. One of our volunteers said to me, "Oh my God, I would love it if you wrote to my boss and told him what I was doing. That was amazing. But what would be more meaningful is if you wrote to my brother." So they're a refugee family who have become very much a part of the BSL family, and this volunteer connects very much with the fellow refugees he works with. And he said, if you were able to write a letter to share with my brother the work that I've done and the difference that has made, that would be the most incredible gift that you could give. So think outside the box, ask your volunteers.
Okay, so we might have been a little controversial and we actually cancelled our awards. Nobody was applying for them, so it didn't seem meaningful. And so we asked our volunteers, what did you want instead, or how can we celebrate you? And similar to what Tracey has said, it's ongoing acknowledgement. Our volunteers are the ones innovating at the moment, so we're actually having them, it's not me on panels usually, it's actually our volunteers, our community groups talking about their successes. So really celebrating and elevating what they do is how we've been, I guess, rewarding and recognising them.
Okay, what we're doing is we have a volunteer thank you function in Volunteer Week every year. And at that, I copied something from Tracey. I always get lots of things from Tracey. You get these pats on the back. Thanks, Tracey. We're actually starting this year where we're asking our volunteers, about to send out an EDM about it now, and calling up our volunteers and asking them, has there been a staff member that's impacted your volunteering? And that will go to our board and get our board to award a staff member to try and get some more staff buy-in into our volunteer program. We nominate each volunteer, even if they come and do some micro volunteering and they only do, you know, one little bit of volunteering through the year, every single volunteer gets nominated for a Volunteer of the Year award through the Centre for Volunteering in New South Wales. All it is an Excel sheet, just putting their details in. It doesn't take you long to do. It might take, you know, a little bit of time. But the things that we got back from some of the volunteers, I got tears and ringing up and thank you. I had one volunteer that put it up on LinkedIn. He came and did a Lego day. Like, he got to hang out with Lego masters. But he put this post up and it got shared over 400 times on LinkedIn. And it was because he was the head of marketing for Salesforce. You don't know who is your volunteers coming in. It didn't take me anything to do that, but it made a huge impact on them. So as everyone's been saying, impact is huge. We don't do the thank you for volunteering 47 hours. We talk about you rattling that tin, how it affected a sick child in hospital. You come into that gala. So what gets sent out in our galas, an EDM goes to anyone that attends and donates at our big galas. I get the same EDM and I adapt it to our volunteers. So our volunteers get to see every time that they come and volunteer with us, how it will affect a sick child in hospital, because that's why they come to our organisation.
So there's lots of questions coming through, and I'm going to try and pick ones that have got quite a few that sort of are similar to each other. One of the questions here is, how do you get buy-in from your leadership to support innovative ideas? Who'd like to go first? Now, come on, we've got not enough time without you arguing.
Okay, so that's been a question that's been asked ever since I started in volunteer management, to get buy-in. You know, our executives, our CEOs, you know, they talk the talk. They come to the volunteer events. You hear volunteers are the lifeblood of the organisation, etc., etc. But unless they're in the arena walking the walk, they're not really supportive of your volunteers. Volunteering takes resources. Depends on the organisation, of course, that you're with. So basically, I try and get in front of the executive, do presentations, and I equate recognition of volunteer managers with volunteering. I tell them, if you value volunteers, you value volunteer management, it's an equation that can't be broken. If you don't value volunteer management and you don't resource volunteer management, then you're not really caring about the volunteers in your organization. And that kind of does strike them. That's my approach.
Thanks, TJ. I go back to what I shared at the start, which is control the narrative. Continue to have conversations everywhere you go with every person you have about why volunteering is critical to your organisation. So at BSL, we talk about wanting to influence systemic change. I talk all the time about how systemic change won't happen until those in the community have buy-in and support the mission of BSL to alleviate and eradicate poverty. And volunteer engagement is one of the most powerful community engagement strategies that we can use to invite our community to participate in the work that we do. And I continue that narrative wherever we go. Tiny little things that we've done. So we got a 250-word thank you at the end of our annual reports. Our team now prepare and write multiple stories every year and hand them to the communications team to say, here you go, here's some content for your annual report. We've reached out to the comms team for their quarterly supporter newsletter. We now write a quarterly story on volunteering. So wherever we can, we get in front of people and we share the story of why volunteering is so critical to our organisation.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you have to be really clear on your organisation's directions and goals and objectives, and then tell the story about how volunteers are actually achieving those. And it doesn't have to be, like Kylie says, it doesn't have to be the hours of the volunteers are actually contributing. You know, for us, it's a lot about people becoming aware of the parks and behaving appropriately in parks. And we do that by creating awareness of volunteer opportunities. So, you know, just really aligning with all of those objectives. And the other thing, when I came into the organisation, volunteers, I think, similar to what Kylie was saying. You know, we were just one little team to the side. I consulted with every area of the business and made them understand how volunteers were actually integral to their business area. So every team now knows that volunteers contribute to their team, and I think that's been really important.
I totally agree with Leesa. You'll see today I've got gold nails on. I'm not a gold nail person, but we had our Lunar New Year gala on the weekend, and we were asked to have 24 volunteers. It was a brand new gala event in the art gallery, pardon me, with the richest Asian philanthropists being in attendance. I said to the development team, what about having Mandarin only speaking volunteers? And they were like, oh, really? And it took a week and a half to get 24 people who speak bilingually. And it was the most amazing event, but they didn't know. So it's not about, you know, that they don't want to know about volunteers or that they don't care. It's because it's our job to be educators. We have to educate them on that. And turning that mindset, it was just a couple of opportunities to say that to the staff, and they go, wow, so now I'll have staff coming to me with amazing opportunities for volunteers because we had to change the narrative, as Tracey said. Our jobs are really hard, but it pays off. 3.5 years later, my job looks totally different. My program is really respected. So any one of you can do that, but it is a lot of hard work, and just stick with it. And you know, you are the biggest cheerleader for your volunteers. That's my biggest job. That's my number one on my job description, is I'm there to advocate for my volunteers. And you will reap the rewards. You've just got to stick with it.
Thank you. There's a whole lot of questions that all seem to fit together to me, so excuse me if I'm misinterpreting what you're sending me, but there are questions like, how did you make the volunteering more accessible and not just to those who are privileged? How do you safely transition someone from being a participant to being a volunteer? Those sorts of things. It's probably a whole range of areas that you all have expertise on, and we might start at this end this time and just hear from you about your thoughts on some of those things.
Okay, well, I was up to 1 o'clock this morning writing my business plan. And it's funny that it's just totally changed. It was all about growth and about building. This year's all about, and I'm like so inspired. It was because I was coming here today, it just flowed out of me about the different changes that we're going to start now looking at our volunteers. We're going to have focus groups. We're having a called focus group, we're having an Indigenous focus group, and we're having a youth focus group. Rather than staff, every quarter we'll get together and talk about what cultural events will be coming up. Next quarter, we'll have volunteers, actually people in our community. Our volunteers are our communities. We're going to ask them how they think we can be more culturally sensitive. But what cultural events are coming up, and how can we fundraise under that banner? Same with the youth and with our Indigenous people. So that's how we're starting it this year.
Well, this kind of goes to, I guess, what I was talking about in terms of giving it back to the community to really determine what their needs are. And I'll borrow from Morris. I don't think he'll mind, the CEO of Blind Sports Victoria in Victoria. Sorry, he tells a story that Parks Victoria actually developed Braille signage in parks quite a few years ago, which was fantastic for people that could get into the parks and actually use those signs. But we had to think of the journey of those people that are vision impaired to actually get there and what that experience is like. So when we were able to give them funding to start a volunteer program, they actually trained volunteers, both vision impaired and sighted, to guide vision impaired people through the whole park to experience nature. So it just kind of tells you, we can't determine what they're going to need. You know, we need to go to the communities to ask that.
Exactly, and that's exactly what I would say. So what we've done at BSL is not implemented anything unless we have gone out to relevant people, participants, teams who work with people who could give us feedback and advice and guidance. So For example, we have a team who work a lot with the South Sudanese community and who engage a lot of parents to work at one of our partner schools where their children go. And in working through our application process with this team, they were able to give us a lot of feedback about how challenging it was. So the amount of content that was in the email, how they had to navigate an online application form, all of the instructions for completing a police check and a working with children check. And so we have gone back and we get advice on simple language. We break down our emails into tiny little bite-sized pieces for those people. We offer to sit with people to go through application processes instead of forcing everybody to do it online. One of the things I say about our profession, we are intensely busy. It is not understood the resources that are required for our role. We can become very, very lazy. We can sit behind our computers and create processes that make it easy for us to churn through volunteers. And often that is to the detriment of the experience of people in our community to participate. So exactly what Leesa has said, we need to go back to the source, to the people who experience or could potentially experience volunteering and get their advice and guidance on how we can better make volunteering accessible.
I would say be mindful, be open. We have lots of volunteers in our organisation with lived experience, which is really important to us. We go out to the communities. The volunteers in your organisation should look like the communities that you are serving. One other thing that we did create was for those who found it hard to navigate joining through technology, we set up an appointlet so that they could call us or get in contact with us, and we actually do the application with them and for them. The other thing that was innovative that we created was, you know, people come to your organisation, to go on your website, they see your various vacancies, and they might go, "There's nothing here for me." So we set up a new thing called Volunteer My Way. And basically what that is, it's a system that we set up where what we were finding, people would come to our organisation, look at the various vacancies, not for me, and move on to some other organisation, a lost opportunity for us. So we created a Volunteer My Way where people can actually tell us how they want to volunteer, what skills they want to bring, and then we put them on that list, and then we try and find a suitable volunteering role for them or create a brand new role. That Volunteer My Way was a very simple setup, but a really successful one.
Okay, so the questions are now starting to get quite specific, but someone has made an observation about volunteer burnout. And I wondered, the question that follows is about whether you've considered or implemented a paid model of delivery to ease burdens. But I wondered if perhaps you might want to comment on volunteer burnout more generally, taking that question into consideration.
Well, with my organisation, it's a lot of event-based. So we have a lot of one-off volunteering. So what we noticed that there was a lot of students and a lot of busy people that really wanted to get in and help us fundraise. So we started a virtual volunteering program. With that, you know, we set up some Zoom meetings to chat about the program. And what it was things that our staff couldn't get to, research. So it wasn't boring stuff, it was research. Like went to our marketing team and said, what would you like to learn about other organisations around the world who fundraise for kids? And so they just did a simple Excel chart with some questions. What's the campaign? What did they raise? Who they raise it for? And we offered this program, and people, we could say you could volunteer in your pajamas. We wanted them to at least give us 2 hours a week, but I said, look, if you can't work for 3 weeks because you've got exams, we don't want you touching it during exams. And we got the most amazing, there was such an amazing opportunity, because all of a sudden these volunteers were coming up with ideas that our marketing team looked at it, and one thing came out from the Great Ormond Street in Children's Hospital in the UK, and we've actually partnered with them now because of the work of some volunteer at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning, because we look at some of the times that they will be logging in, and they had a great idea. They're things that we didn't do, because getting them into the hospital, I was finding that they really want to come and help, but they've got such busy lives, and some of them will just still come in and put themselves at burnout. So that's the way that we did it.
Yeah, I think for us, we've got a much older demographic volunteering. So their fear, they're still putting so much time in, but I guess their fear is that who's going to take over, when they're not going to be there anymore, which is, a very valid concern when you've invested so much time into something. So really for us, it's about creating partnerships and trying to think about who we can bring in, who we can help, what other community groups might want to join the existing community groups to not take over, but share that kind of load. So we've got lots of examples, and particularly around inclusion in our Werribee model, where we've got people that are coming in with disabilities that are helping. We've got the local community that are a migrant community. So very diverse, very different age groups, all coming in to now help in that setting.
I'm going to encourage you to very thoroughly read the National Volunteering Strategy that is being launched today. The very first systemic shift that is encouraged in our strategy is to broaden our understanding of volunteering and to recognise that the current traditional model of volunteering is very much based on a white colonial model, and that we have an opportunity to rethink what volunteering could be. When we talk about volunteer burnout, we very much sit in that old traditional model where we expect people to do things the same way they've always been doing them. And in terms of volunteer burnout, what we know is being demanded by volunteers, traditional volunteers across the world, is more flexibility, more opportunity to determine what they do and how they do it, and to ensure that they have an impact on the world around them. You need to be listening to volunteers, and we need to be reimagining what it means to be involved in volunteer engagement.
Volunteer burnout. We like to ensure, or we strive to ensure, that psychological safety is very important for our volunteers. So our volunteers have access to the exact same EAP that our staff do. So they can have face-to-face with psychologists, counsellors, just ring up anytime that they would like to. We do a lot of training in this area for our volunteers. As you would imagine, our crisis support volunteers, they're probably most susceptible to burnout. I was one myself for 5 years, and I thought 5 years was enough. Because it is intense being a crisis line supporter. We have lots of courses around treating people fairly in the workplace. We have a zero tolerance on bullying and below the line behaviours. And of course, the national standards are important in terms of the hours that volunteers. Yes, the volunteer may want to come in every day, but you need to protect the volunteer from that as well, and that ensure that the amount of hours that they're doing is within the standards, and that standard was put there for many reasons, but burnout is one of the main reasons. So look after your volunteers, and also there's a lot of burnout in volunteer management as well. Let's not forget about that. So mindfulness. Talk to me.
So we're coming to the end of our questions area, but there's a couple of important ones that I'd like to ask. So I'm just going to push the edge a little bit. The first question is, with limited resources and the volunteer coordinator is not a full-time staff member, volunteer turnover is high, what would be the first innovation step and why?
Set some boundaries. I would be determining what is possible in the time that you have with the resources that you have. think about one impact that you can create and set boundaries on what you need to do and you need to have and you need to stop to be able to achieve that.
Look, I totally agree. I've actually been that person in an organisation where I was paid 20 hours a week and was working 70. I did myself no favours because I got burnt out after a couple of years and they employed 2 people in your position. You have to be an advocate for yourself, not just your volunteers as well. You're also the biggest representative of your organisation, that your volunteers are looking to you. If you're going to be doing this, if you're going to be working 60, 70 hours a week and only be paid for 20, your volunteers are going to follow. So it's really important that those boundaries are the most important thing that you set straight up. And why would your organisation pay for you full time if you're going to be doing it there for 20? So you've got to advocate for yourself, but you're also advocating for your program and your volunteers.
So the other question I'm going to push the boundary with is, how do I smooth the them and us attitude between staff and volunteers? And this goes both ways.
The first thing I did when I walked into my organisation was say that that the volunteers under WH&S are the same as staff. The worst thing is if you treat, there's a way of treating your volunteers as just volunteers, but also putting capes on your volunteers is not going to help them. You know, your volunteers, the only difference, like I think all volunteers are paid. I always say all volunteers have a currency. It's up to us as volunteers, managers, to figure out what their currency is. You walk into your organisation at the start and you say that, you know, your volunteers are the same as staff. Then if there's issues, they're treated the same as staff. They have supervision and you know, warnings and all that sort of stuff. But also when they do well. But they don't have they're not superheroes. They just work as the same as your staff.
DJ?
Yeah, I think it's all about culture. What do they say? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Is that correct? We don't have a them and us, I believe, in the organisation, but that's taken a lot of hard work. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I tend not to use language like my volunteers or our volunteers. I see them as people who are involved in our mission, just like staff are, and should be treated equally. And yeah, it is culture, and it's continually promoting the amazing donation of time that volunteers are giving to the organisation, and it is training. Volunteer training for staff is really, really important. And they have many light bulb moments when you go and you speak the way we should be speaking about volunteers.
I had 2 really, really quick tips. First tip, when you're at meetings and people say staff and volunteers every time, staff and volunteers. Angela did this at the YMCA for years, on and on and on, until staff started saying it for her in meetings. The other thing is use the word workforce. When you are talking about your organisation, don't say staff and volunteers. Our workforce of paid staff and volunteers. Use the word workforce when you're talking about it. So try to think about your language, as DJ said, and start to create that culture and that shift in narrative.
So I think we've heard a lot about innovative ideas and innovative approaches, but the underlying narrative for me is the narrative. And I think that's something that's come through very strongly. What I'd like to do now is ask each of our panel members to just sum up or give us a key something that they've taken from this discussion. How we're going to keep them to time, I don't know, but we'll give it a try. We'll start perhaps with Leesa, because that just changes the way the narrative is going.
Bit innovative. I think, you know, it's been amazing to sit up here with our panelists. The one thing I'd probably say is that you know, we've reflected that our jobs are really hard. So have fun, you know, think about ideas that you actually want to do and that your community is saying that they want you to do with them, and just go for it, try it.
I think if you're in a big organisation or a small organisation, you're not alone. you're not alone. Like I used to think I was alone as this volunteer coordinator all by myself, but reach out on LinkedIn, especially on LinkedIn, or we've got a Facebook group. I think there's 700, it's up here. Join that and you'll be surprised how just having a conversation, Tracey and I have had many, we meet once a month, we have a catch up and share ideas. That's a big thing I found myself. That was a big change in my my work.
I think for me, similarly, I think we haven't touched on it, but you know, we are but 4 people in a network of thousands and thousands and thousands of leaders of volunteer engagement across this country. And I have not come up with one single innovative idea on my own. And I think the more that we connect, and I will say this, we're pretty poor at it in Australia. I'm very envious of our colleagues in Europe and in America and in Canada. They are incredible at networking nationally. We are terrible at it. And I would love to see us connecting, reaching out, chatting, asking questions, sharing ideas, not relying on our peak bodies to do it for us, but creating relationships so that we can help lift each other up, because it is hard, but it is amazing. And I think we can achieve incredible things together.
Be grateful for what you can be grateful for. You know, I'm lucky to be sitting here today. That had that's a pretty big impact on my life. So the other thing I would say, do not let anybody tell you what you're worth. Know your own worth. And if you're in an organization where you have been pushing that rock up the hill for too long, sometimes it's okay to say that's enough. I'm worth more than this. I will find someplace else to go. Okay, so have gratitude for your volunteers, have gratitude that you're here today. I'm very grateful that you've given us the time to speak with you today. As I said, you know, innovation is a huge topic, but lead from a place of courage, lead from a place of mindfulness, and I look forward to seeing you during the conference, and I'm very humbled and honoured to be sitting with this panel today and to be sitting here with you today. So thank you very, very much.
So what I'm going to ask you to do very quickly while you're trying to download that is talk to the person next to you or behind you who you don't already know and exchange contact information with them. I'm only going to give you a minute. We haven't got much more time than that. But the networks that you create at this conference will be important. Okay, so how do I make it possible for people to hear me? How do you shush a room full of volunteer managers? So hands up who met someone new. Hands up who caught up with an old friend. Bit of both, which is really good. The panel have invited you to look for them on LinkedIn and to connect with them on LinkedIn. There's already been some requests to join their Facebook group, which is fabulous.
Just putting a post on the group, but we realised that we are but 120 people in the room, and however many hundreds of you online, not everyone's in the room. So please send the group link out to all of your colleagues, all of your peers. We would love for everyone to join us and to continue the conversation. So.
Okay, so just so you're aware, there is morning tea, and then the next session starts at 10:45. You're all be going to different things that are on your lanyard that you signed up for that tell you where to go, so I'm not going to try and do that. What I would like to do, however, is invite you to thank our panel. So we have DJ, Tracey, Leesa and Kylie. I think you'll agree that was a very successful session. I'm sorry to those people whose questions we didn't get to. And I also believe that those people who are watching online were having a little bit of trouble with the size of the people that they were trying to see in the film. There's not much we could do about that at the time, but I must also acknowledge that that question came through. Thank you very much.
And can I just say thank you, Megan, for facilitating our session. You know, you got up super early and she caught up with us to make sure that we all knew what was happening today. So we appreciate it. Thank you.